And so they signed this counter statement, Scholars for Truth About Genocide. And they say legal anti-Semitism, history, Holocaust, and genocide scholars, former prosecutors, and other authorities, including descendants of survivors, call on International Association of Genocide Scholars to retract resolution accusing Israel of genocide amid clear misapplication of law and history. So this was organized by Elliot Malin, who is a Twitter guy. That's how I would describe him. So he got together a bunch of people that I describe as either very Zionist-oriented people that have like methodological incapacities to declare that Israel has committed a genocide, and a bunch of Twitter people that don't really have any expertise. And this is what they wrote. They say, I don't know if you can read this, it's small. Hold on. That's better. On behalf of the undersigned individuals and organizations who exist to educate about anti-Semitism, international law, the Holocaust, and genocide, and who cumulatively and actively work to enhance the prevention of genocide, we find that the International Association of Genocide Scholars resolution fails to accurately apply the law and facts of the war in Gaza. Moreover, we are alarmed by the process that was taken to pass the resolution, with reported promises of town halls and dissenting opinions to be published, and those promises being broken. Okay, again, town halls are not required to passing a resolution at the IAGS. When they have been used, it has been to inform members of a not very well-known case. Not to have a debate about whether genocide is happening or not. It's sort of messed up to, like, you know, engage in Holocaust, in genocide denial and atrocity denial, in this context, right? When you have a resolutions committee that will say, yeah, this makes sense, this resolution makes sense, and then you have no, actually, we need a town hall so that we can deny that that makes sense. It's sort of weird. But anyway, since the resolution was passed with a total of 129 voting members and about 107 voting in favor out of over 500 members, the quieting of dissent is an alarming tactic used on such a controversial matter. There was no quieting of dissent because town halls are never a feature of dissent. The analysis of the resolution happens at the resolutions committee, right? And the idea that this is too few members, 107 out of 500, is silly when you consider that most resolutions are passed with 20% of quorum, and this was passed with like 28% of quorum. Right? So, again, bad faith argument here. Genocide, continues the statement, is the gravest offense known to humankind. To dilute its legal standards for ideological ends is a form of moral violence. It dishonors the memory of past victims, misleads the public about present atrocities, and obstructs efforts to avert future ones. Which is like very categorical. If you consider that calling something a genocide dilutes the importance of the genocide, then at what point are you engaging in genocide denial yourself, right? Lydia Bruss says, while I accept your reasoning here, which is sound on open membership, would it still not have been sagacious to implement some degree of vetting or requirements for entry irrespective of, whether that be lived experience, higher education credentials, policy background, etc.? Surely they would have anticipated that something like this was going to happen in the post-mortem of the resolution. No. No. I don't know how to explain this. You sort of need to be in academia. Like, these people don't have a marketing department. They don't have a crisis department. They don't have, they barely have an IT department, right? If you're asking me, did they anticipate that this would become what it became? My gut feeling, I don't have any particular information on this, I'm just speculating, but my gut feeling is that no, they didn't anticipate it. Because why would they? No resolution ever generated this kind of backlash. So why would they anticipate it for this one? It's so left field here. It doesn't really happen. This kind of like mass tantrum doesn't really happen. So no, I don't think they anticipated. Maybe they should have, but I'm like 80% sure that they had no idea this could happen. Oh, I know. I mean, okay, if I had been involved, I would have told them, you need to prepare. But I mean, this is an academic, international, professional organization. They're not used to controversy. they're used to being pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Like, when was the last time that the International Association of Genocide Scholars was on the front page of a newspaper or mentioned by a mainstream channel? Never. Did you know that the IAGS had said that there's a genocide in Xinjiang against Uyghur people? No, you didn't. Did you know that they said that the Iraq committed genocide against the Kurds? No, you didn't. So they didn't really expect this. Okay, let's see. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas invaded Israel and acted with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, Jews and Israelis as a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. Further, Hamas and their allied organizations took innocent people hostage and continue to hold hostages. So, okay. It is, I've said this before on stream, and I'll say it again. It is very difficult to discuss whether October 7th meets the legal definition of genocide or not because of terms of service violations and potentially as well because of like prescription rules in the United Kingdom. So I can't get into detail because one of the legal requirements in the United Kingdom is that you need to be mindful that to avoid that through negligence on your behalf, you don't end up making someone see or act in support of a prescribed organization. So it's a negligence standard. So if I analyze this and some of you interpret that I'm supporting a prescribed organization and therefore you go on and support a prescribed organization, then I've inflicted the law, right? So I need to be very careful with how I talk about this. So in analyzing, the motivations behind this, I would need to be extremely careful and write it very carefully. So I don't want to do this live because I don't think I can comply with the legal standard of negligence. So I won't actually analyze whether October 7th qualifies as a genocide, both so I don't violate Twitch's terms of service by looking into the motivations of what they call an extremist organization, and also so I don't, I don't want to be at risk of violating any kind of like prescription rules here in the UK. So I won't do that, okay? This is not what I am doing. Let me make it very clear that this is not what I am doing. I am not actually analyzing the reasons behind October 7th or why Hamas acted in the way that it acted, and nothing I am saying here should be interpreted as support for any proscribed organization whatsoever, okay? Now, with that disclaimer, these two sentences sort of don't go well together, right? The intent of taking hostages and the intent of extermination don't really go well together. And that's all I'll say, right? I'll leave it at that. Just those two sentences, Hamas acted with intent to destroy, and they wanted to take people hostage, don't add up. That doesn't add up. That's not a, let me put it this way. If you are applying the Genocide Convention, that is not a very good way of applying it. Is there a way to conclude that October 7th was a genocide? Yes. I know people that I respect that have concluded that October 7th was genocide, Martin Shaw being the main example. Martin Shaw, an expert in genocide, a very well-known expert in genocide, author of the book What is Genocide, famously, has concluded that, in his opinion, October 7th was a genocide, and he has done so because his whole approach to genocide is to move away from willfulness, from special intent, and more into structural aspects. So his concept of genocide is more akin to the crime against humanity of extermination than to the actual concept of genocide. So it is possible to do that. You can conclude that October 7th was a genocide under specific theories. This right here, like this right here, that is not a good way of doing it. So that is sort of suspect. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're putting two sentences one after the other that isn't, that don't work well with each other. Cherenkov says a real life professional grade CYA disclaimer. What's CYA? But yeah, no, I actually I do need to do. I mean, I live in a country where like hundreds of people are being arrested every weekend for demonstrating in Parliament Square with signs that say the name of a proscribed organization whose name I cannot say, for legal reasons, right? I've said this before. I think this is the most. I'm Peruvian. Um, when I was a kid, my country was messed up when it comes to freedom of information, freedom of speech. In my adult life in Peru, I never faced this kind of like restriction to freedom of speech. Or when I was living in the US. Living in the UK, to my incredible surprise, is the most restrictive free speech environment I have ever lived on. So yes, I actually do need to do a professional grade cover my ass disclaimer because I really want to operate within the bounds of the law, but also I want to be able to be a scholar and an academic and explore my area of expertise without fear of like going to jail. So yeah, I do need to make this, it's stupid, but I do need to make these disclaimers because I don't want to be in breach of terms of service or in breach of the law in particular, right? It's crazy, but that is the world we live in. So all I'll say is that these two sentences are not a very good way of concluding that October 7th was a genocide. Me personally, I agree with the ICC prosecutor's classification that said that it was a crime against humanity, the crime against humanity of extermination. I don't agree that it is genocide, and I've actually given a lot of thought to this. Like if you watch my first interview with Owen Jones, like back when in like late 2023, I actually said it's potentially genocide, like October 7th. I don't think that anymore after looking into it with a lot of detail. Like from a scholarly perspective, I don't think that it was. I just cannot really go into detail as to why, because of legal and terms of service restrictions. So yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, what I can tell you is that that over there, that is not a good way of doing that analysis. So thus, they continue, thus Hamas committed the crime of genocide and remains the only party to legally meet the requirements of the elements of the crime of genocide. They just don't tell you how. It is undoubtedly true that the war in Gaza has harmed a large number of people who would not have been harmed or killed but for this war. It is understood from available information that the death toll includes those who have been killed by both Israel and Hamas. It is further understood that Hamas has utilized the practice of it is further understood that Hamas has utilized the practice of human shielding as a systematic strategy to attempt to immunize itself from harm and to increase the harm of Palestinian civilians. This is a war crime committed by Hamas against the Palestinian people in Gaza. This is one thing that I don't get, this essentializing of the conflict, where the conflict only can follow one single way of being. Number one, Israel is trying to hit Hamas. Number two, Hamas has a baby in front and is putting the baby as a human shield against Israel. That is not how most of the attacks in this war, how most of the deaths in this war have taken place. Like that's not what happens in the death zones. That's not what happens in starvation. That's not what happens in the GHF. That's not what happens in Where's Daddy. That essentializing of the conflict makes very little sense with what we know now about how Israel targets people. That doesn't make any sense. This paragraph doesn't make any sense. Not with what we know right now. Like Hamas has utilized the practice of human shielding. Sure, I can believe that. I can believe that Hamas will use human shields. Yes. Is that the majority of encounters in this situation? No, of course not. There's death zones. There's starvation. There's GHF. There's like kids with sniping wounds to the brain. Come on. Lydia Bros says, I think a disclaimer is warranted. At the moment, there's real risk in the UK. I wouldn't put it past them to introduce legislation that is retrospective to hunt down anyone voicing a contrary viewpoint at them at this point. Yeah. So the IAGS resolution imparts that all of the deaths that have occurred in Gaza are a result of Israel's conduct and acts as a means to excuse Hamas from having agency for its own actions. I mean, no, they don't. I don't think they ever say that. I don't think anything in the resolution actually does that. This is just weird. Further, the IAGS resolution stipulates without any justification that Israel has committed indiscriminate and deliberate attacks against the civilian and civilian infrastructure, hospital, homes, commercial buildings, etc. However, to make such a conclusion requires the negation of Hamas's well-documented use of civilian and humanitarian infrastructure for the purposes of waging war. No. Like, we just saw in camera a double-top attack on a hospital. There were no human shields there. We just saw how Israel is demolishing entire residential buildings in Gaza City right now. There were no human shields there. The military target in that huge high-rise building that was destroyed in Gaza City was a Hamas camera, quote-unquote Hamas camera. So, no. Again, this essentializing of the conflict, where the only possible way in which attacks take shape is Israel wants to kill a Hamas member, but the Hamas member grabs a human shield and puts it in front of the weapon. That's not how it happens. That's not most of the conflict. So this is an essentialized version of the conflict where they think that this is the only way the conflict operates, but it isn't. It is well established, they say, that Hamas has weaponized hospitals, mosques, schools, civilian homes, and even humanitarian zones under various provisions of international law, including but not limited to the 14th Geneva Convention. This conduct would cause such places to lose the protections that they would normally benefit from. Not hospitals, though. Hospitals always need to be warned before attack, and we just saw on video how Israel does not warn hospitals before attack. Again, there is video, people. You cannot keep on using this essentialized narrative that isn't verifiable by facts. Hamas members have openly admitted to this strategy. It has been repeatedly shown that Hamas has warned civilians not to leave Gaza City. Ignoring Hamas's conduct only causes more harm to Palestinian civilians who are meant to be protected. Again, do I believe that Hamas never engages in human shielding? No. I'm sure they do. That is not the majority of the encounters in this war, though. That's stupid. The IAGS resolution, they say, further states recognizing that Israel has killed or injured more than 50,000 children and that this destruction of a substantial part of the group constitutes genocide. What it misses is that Hamas allegedly utilizes children as combatants, oh my god, and that children make up about 50% of Gaza's population, a significantly higher proportion than nearly any other place in the world. Oh, so the argument is like, what are we going to do? Like, there's too many of them. We can't, you explode a bomb, you kill a child, what are you going to do? Is that really the argument? This would cause problems in the analysis of a significant portion when the total number of deaths and injuries in Gaza as of the writing of the statement constitute 224,217 total casualties, total deaths reported 63,000, and total injuries reported 160,000 per Palestinian media sources, resulting in 22% of the total casualties being children, well under the proportion of children in the population of Gaza. What's important to further note, but it is still a fuck ton of children. What's important to further note about the casualty numbers is that it includes a significant portion of combatant casualties without differentiation between civilians and combatants. Yes, but we do have a document that says that only like 8,900 were actually targeted as combatants in actual strikes. Again, this is just very disingenuous. The IAGS resolution further cites the issuance of arrest warrants against Netanyahu, while ignoring that the ICC PTC-1 expressly rejected the warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant for the crime against humanity of extermination, a lower threshold crime, saying on the basis of the material presented by the prosecution, the chamber could not determine that all elements of the crime against humanity of extermination were met. Yes, but the element that was not met was mass killing. One of the elements that was met was subjecting the population to conditions of life calculated to their destruction. The court actually, the PTC actually did say that. So they met the actus reus of genocide. They just didn't think that there were other elements to the crime that were missing, but the one that's similar to genocide, that was met. So weird that you skipped that part, scholars for truth about genocide. The authors of the IAGS resolution further state that the ICJ determined in the provisional measures that Israel's actions were a plausible genocide. However, this grossly misrepresents what the ICJ determined and is a misstatement of the plausibility of determination. The ICJ correctly found that Palestinians as a distinct national group have plausible rights under the Genocide Convention that can plausibly be infringed, not that genocide had been committed. How can they plausibly be infringed under the Genocide Convention? Scholars for truth about genocide. How can these rights under the Genocide Convention be plausibly be infringed? Is it maybe by committing genocide? The author of that decision and ex-ICJ president John Donoghue clarified the matter on the BBC. Yes, and Judge Salam, also a president, also clarified it, contradicting John Donoghue. So, this is just silly. Even further, the IAGS resolution cites various organizations that have accused Israel of genocide by, as put B'Tselem, adopting broader analytical framework. This burden of the analytical framework exists to stretch the required intent from dolus specialis to a more inclusive dolus eventualis. This is not true. This is not true. The only ones that have actually advanced dolus eventualis is Ireland. No one else has. This is not true. I'm going to make a video on this, like one of these debunking videos. This is not true. The definition of genocide has not been changed by any of these NGOs. What they say should be broadened is the only reasonable inference test by the ICJ, not the definition of genocide. I don't have time to do this right now, but I will do a video on this. All of these accusations willfully ignored the established jurisprudence around the Genocide Convention and the commission of the crime of genocide in Bosnia and Serbia. Todos especiales, blah, blah, blah. Has to be convincingly shown by reference to particular circumstances, unless a general plan to that end can be convincingly demonstrated to exist. And for a pattern of conduct to be accepted as evidence of its existence, it would have to be such that it could only point to the existence of such intent. Yes, if you have death squads, death zones, the only inference is that you want to kill people en masse. If you're starving the population, the only inference is that you want them to die of starvation. Patterns of conduct that indicate that the only reasonable inference is genocidal exist in Gaza. In Gaza, there are numerous other plausible explanations for the intent of military operations in Gaza. Nice proofreading, guys. From Hamas's weaponizing of civilians to humanitarian infrastructure, the documented booby trapping of buildings to tunnels that are longer than the London Underground, and the continued holding of hostages. Plausible explanations for the entire war are not the same as alternative reasonable inferences for specific patterns of conduct. The entire war has many patterns of conduct inside of it. So this is just not how it's done. Again, this is not a good application of the Genocide Convention. How long is this? Oh god. Okay, I need to hurry because I need to go cook. Another critical failure of the IAGS resolution is that it not only fails to establish the elements of genocide, it does not set the legal standard for which genocide must be proven. Genocide at the ICJ must be proven fully conclusively, meaning that there can be no other plausible explanation. This is not true. Because other reasonable explanations exist. It's not a reasonable explanation, it's another reasonable inference from a pattern of conduct. It's not, oh, there's another reasonable explanation to the whole war. That's not true. It's not a reasonable explanation. It's another reasonable inference from a specific pattern of conduct. This is just a misreading of the standard. This is applying the law wrong. Since the legal standard cannot be met, it cannot be considered to be genocide. Another fatal error of the IAGS resolution is that it fails to consider the steps that Israel itself has taken to prevent civilian harm. Again, this is humanitarian camouflage. Israel's targeting standards are so broad that they are not really humanitarian. If you throw a bunch of leaflets telling people to go on death marches to the south of Gaza and see if they make it alive, you're not being humanitarian. You're being genocidal. It is critical that we do not water down the legal elements of genocide for the purposes of advancing ideological positions and bias. Holocaust and genocide scholars can have legitimate concerns about Israeli conduct in Gaza without working to disparage the very legal standards that exist to protect people from these crimes. So, in order to protect the sanctity of genocide, we need to say that there are no genocides. Nice thinking there. Chartov says that I'll find that video easy to make. Yeah, probably. The genocide allegation has been soundly and persuasively rejected by leading scholars, retired Western military authorities, war crimes prosecutors, and other observers. Finally, the IAGS never mentions that this war could end if Hamas were to release all the hostages. This is not true. Netanyahu has said so. This is not true. This resolution it's just a bunch of videos for me to make. This is basically a Hasbara maker. They demanded the resolution is lifted. Sign the letter. I will not sign this letter. Initial signatories. I have like 3 minutes left. So Elliot Malin, who, sure, Esquire. You're not British, Elliot. Yeah, it's a Bat Hasbara gold mine. It's true. Who else do I know here? Brian Cox, sure. Who said that the IDF could shoot Greta Thunberg. Russell Shalev, who thinks that Israel owns the West Bank. Who else do I know here? I'm just going really fast, so I might miss some. Yeah, I'm gonna miss several for sure, but just the ones I've seen are very suspect. To say that Colin White, oh god, he has no expertise in genocide. He's an IR scholar. Adam Lewis Klein is I've had the wackiest conversations with him on Twitter. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, this is the scandal. I think it's a. Oh yeah, yeah. Alan Dershowitz was here somewhere, which is ridiculous. Um, Honestly, I find this whole scandal constructed and in bad faith, and I think it should not be taken seriously. Um, so yeah, that's it. That's the whole scandal, and I think this letter is terrible, and I think the IAGS deserves all our support because they're going through a tough time. So yeah, that's it. That's basically it.